Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. We're live at the ShopRite LPGA Classic in Galloway at the Seaview. We are outside McGettigan's Casamigos Tequila 19th hole outside on a beautiful day. All the golfers are off. The tee times are all the last tee time I think was 2:20. So all of the groups and pairings are out. And, of course, we are here till 6 o'clock tonight. It's time for Football at 4 on the week where the Eagles had some OTAs. We had some news earlier from Vic Fangio talking and covering it all week long for Inside the Birds and InsideTheBirds.com is Andrew DiCecco, who's back with us now for a Football at 4 Friday edition on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Andrew, what's going on, my man? How are you?
Mike, I'm doing great. How are you, man?
Always good to catch up, especially when I get you on the Friday. We get a little happy hour Friday vibe, get the whole recap of what we saw. Vic Fangio talked earlier this week, and I know one of the things you've been looking forward to when we get to training camp will be some of these battles. One of them is the cornerback battle. I know that's one that you've talked a lot about. Did you get a sense from this week, listening to Vic Fangio and some of the things that happened at these OTAs, has any new wrinkle been put into that cornerback opportunity when they get to training camp?
Well, I think he opened some eyes, Mike, that it is actually going to be a legitimate competition between Kelee Ringo and Adoree Jackson. And Vic's so candid, and I appreciate that. And it's really tough to configure how this might go, but the Eagles would love nothing more than for Kelee Ringo to win this job. Obviously, this is his third season there. He's familiar with the coaching staff. They know how he operates. But Adoree Jackson might have something to say about that. And I think that it's a little bit more than having signing a veteran 1 year prove-it-deal type of player. I don't get the Greedy Williams vibes from Adoree Jackson. I think he's going to make things interesting, and it's going to be between those two players.
Yeah, they brought the veteran in Adoree Jackson. Ringo's been here. This is his third year now. And then, of course, he mentioned Cooper DeJean, and he mentioned the word safety with him a couple times. So I'm really interested to get your interpretation, Andrew, on how he factors in that safety room, outside corner. Is he even in play there? We know the slot that he excelled in last year. But what did you make of the way Vic Fangio talked about Cooper DeJean and how his role might expand or be different this year?
Yeah, that's about as close as you'll get to see Vic Fangio beam. He was lighting up a little bit, talking about the different ways to utilize Cooper DeJean. And what makes Cooper DeJean so interesting, and it's also a gift and a curse, that's why he fell to the second round. Teams probably didn't know how to utilize him, but I don't think that he's going to be utilized much at safety this year. He even talked about, they're not in base very often, but if they are, that might be an area in which they choose to deploy him. I think eventually he'll be an outside corner. I believe that's what they drafted him to be, and he does have that capability. But right now, this season, I think that he's primarily going to be a nickel corner because, as we've talked about, Mike, it is a starting position in today's NFL. I would argue that it's the toughest position to play on defense, and he's so good at it. He's already one of the best at that position in the NFL because you have to have the knowledge of what everyone on the defense is responsible for. You also have to be ready to get involved with run fits and things like that. But you also have to have the short area quickness and the ability to defend receivers of all shapes and sizes. And you don't have the sideline helping you there. So receivers have that two-way go. And they don't have anybody else that's equipped to handle that role. So by default, Cooper DeJean's probably going to be primarily slotted there this season.
All right, what do you make, Andrew, of him mentioning him and the word safety? Not once, but twice in the same sentence he brought up safety.
Well, I underlined that in my notes as he was sitting there talking, and I scouted Cooper DeJean as a safety and an outside corner, but I did look at him quite a bit as a safety because I think his skill set translates favorably to that position. And Vic actually echoed the same sentiment, saying, I think he would do very well there, were the words that he used, and that he does have the skill set for it. I still have a hard time envisioning them utilizing him there because he's such a valuable piece that corner and nickel are more valuable commodities, valuable positions, and they already drafted Drew Makuba to play safety. Sidney Brown's still there, so they have bodies there, and he's just too valuable to what he does right now for me to kind of be of the understanding or the belief that he's really going to be deployed at safety.
That's going to be interesting. If he is not the top candidate, obviously, to play next to Reed Blankenship, he mentioned Tristan McCollum, and obviously everybody's just assuming that Drew Makuba and Sidney Brown are the two that are battling. Tristan McCollum's in there, Lewis Seen. We talked about him with Adam yesterday. After these OTAs, which finish next week, one more mandatory, and then they're kind of done for a while here. Is this a two-man race in your mind? Is he giving McCollum a courtesy, or do you see him legitimately in that competition?
No, it's primarily a two-person race between Sidney Brown and Drew Makuba, but it is notable that he mentioned Tristan McCollum, and I feel like he doesn't want Tristan to get slighted. Vic doesn't just mention names for the sake of doing so. Tristan is a player that, and I've been very adamant about this over the past couple of seasons, he's a player that the Eagles like. And every time I mention his name, I'm always reminded of, but he gave up a touchdown in the Super Bowl. So did Sidney Brown. Sidney Brown's up for a starting job this year. Tristan doesn't have the big playability of a Sidney Brown or a Drew Makuba. But what he does provide, and this goes a long way with Vic Fangio, he's fundamentally sound, he's tough, and there's not a lot of guesswork when he's out there. You know that he's more often than not going to be in the right place at the right time. And I think that because he embodies or has many of those characteristics that he looks for from a safety, that's why he mentioned him. But I really do think it's going to be between Makuba and Brown. But he doesn't want Tristan to be left out of that conversation. And I think that he's going to be the fourth safety. But he's flying under the radar, Mike. And you wouldn't think so because he made the 53 last year. But I've gotten about over a half dozen questions about Lewis Seen, and people think that he's, built for that fourth spot, that he's a shoo-in for that. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think there's not a lot of respect there there's not enough respect for Tristan McCollum and what he's been able to do and what he provides to that defense.
All right, yesterday, Adam brought up under-the-radar players. One was at defensive tackle Byron Young, third-round pick with the Raiders. Do you put him on the map in replacing Milton Williams and, that spot there where, someone's got to pick up those snaps?
Yeah, well, he's going to have a shot, but it's a slim one. He's an interesting name. Of course, Thomas Booker is a holdover from last season. He's the backup nose behind Jordan Davis. But I would also mention another guy that you should keep an eye on. That's Gabe Hall, the second-year defensive lineman. He went to Baylor. He was a highly coveted undrafted free agent, about 6'6", 295 pounds, can play any position on the defensive line. Didn't really flash last summer, which I was surprised about because I did like his tape coming out of college. But he's somebody now that has a full year working with defensive line coach Clint Hurt, just like Byron Young, but Byron Young was also hurt last season. So I think that he would also be in the mix as well. So I kind of look at it as a three-person race between Thomas Booker, Byron Young, and Gabe Hall for that final spot.
All right, at the beginning of the week, we know Bryce Huff was moved, and that was reported at the end of last week. But now that Huff is gone, what's the messaging there with what's left? I mean, it's obvious that Huff was not a part of their plans. But when you move a guy like Huff, does that say that they really trust and believe in Hunt, or is this still something that's fluid?
They do like J-Hooks Hunt quite a bit. I think it was more, I wouldn't read too much into it other than the fact that it was evident that Bryce Huff wasn't a fit for this defense. And why prolong something? Why kick the can down the road if you already know what he is as a player, who he is as a player, and then it's not going to be a fit in your scheme? They did right by the player, and they cut ties and gave, both teams are going to win in that trade. But to look at it from a different perspective here, they have three edge rushers that I think are pretty formidable in obviously Nolan Smith, J-Hooks Hunt, and Azeez Ojulari. And they do like J-Hooks Hunt quite a bit, and they're optimistic about him having a breakout season. But I wouldn't look too much into it other than they parted ways with a player who clearly wasn't a fit and wasn't going to be a fit. So they're still really light there, by the way.
Yes, and then, of course, there's linebacker, in which Vic Fangio mentioned. Obviously, Jahad Campbell, he said mid-August. That raises a little eyebrows. Let's stop with him and just get a little more on that. That would tell me mid-August that there's a possibility that he does not appear in any preseason games. And if that's the case, no training camp, most likely no preseason, maybe one game. Do you see him ready to play on Thursday night against Dallas on September 4?
Yeah, it's an interesting timeline, right? Because the Eagles certainly aren't going to rush Jahad Campbell back. He's their first-round pick, and they have big plans for him. And when you hear Vic Fangio say sometime in August, I mean, there's always so much you can do in terms of getting those mental reps to prepare you for what's ahead. And I have to think that, yeah, maybe he might get one preseason game under his belt, but what capacity can we expect him to actually go out there and play? They're not going to overexpose him and risk injury. And I would think that he would be ready for Thursday night. But again, I don't know that you can pencil him in as a starter or expect him to take on, half the snaps or anything like that. They're probably going to get his feet wet and gradually work him into the defense. But something noticeable from OTAs the other day when we were there and it was open to the media was that on a far field, if you look far enough, you could see Vic Fangio working with Jihad Campbell, who actually was wearing a helmet that day. Obviously, he did not practice, but you get the sense that Vic's doing whatever he can to get him ready so that you don't have to necessarily, you're not swimming as much when you're cleared.
All right, talk with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. He covered the Vic Fangio presser and, of course, all of Eagles OTAs. So many things emerging from that at linebacker. You just talked about Campbell. Nakobe Dean doesn't sound like, his timeline wasn't even given. It was just ways down the road. If not Campbell and Dean, who are you looking at to possibly be on the field?
Yeah, it's a really light group, but Jeremiah Trotter Jr. will be the next up, and he doesn't have the athleticism that you probably would look for from that position, but he is a highly instinctive player, incredibly high football IQ. Doesn't look like he put on a lot of weight or added anything to his frame, so he already was undersized, but he makes up for that with his football intelligence and ability to diagnose and those instincts that you like. But they're really light there. Smile Mondon might work into it, the rotation a little bit in training camp, but I would expect, just by default, they have to add another player there because then we're looking at Dallas Gant. We're looking at Lance Dixon, an undrafted free agent. They don't necessarily have the bodies that you need to take into training camp. But Jeremiah Trotter Jr., to answer your question, would be the next man up.
All right, Andrew, you look at defense there, a lot of questions that are going to be on. And he brought up an interesting point. Last year, he said, hey, we had a lot of questions last year, too. We didn't, Bond, nobody knew about him. We had 2 rookies stepping in here. There was a lot of questions on last year's team. Do you is it fair what he said with last year's team and this year's team? Do you see parallels there, or is that not fair?
Yeah, I do. And I was having this conversation with somebody the other day because they were of the belief that, they're going to get out to a slower start. There's a lot of young players on defense. And I said, well, that was the case last year as well. Coaching matters. The Eagles have some of the best position coaches in the NFL. They prioritize player development, and they bring in players who are accustomed to high standards, to playing at the highest level. So there's not a lot of gray area there. They know what's expected. They're ready for the tough coaching, and that's only part of it. They have the coaching staff in place to get these guys ready. So I don't necessarily look at it in terms of them being young. A lot of these players played on the highest stage in the Super Bowl. So yeah, you maybe look at a Drew Makuba or a Keely Ringo, but if you look across the NFL, Mike, every defense has some question marks there. When you have Vic Fangio at the helm, I think you should be pretty confident about that defense moving forward.
I know Vic Fangio spoke, so everybody talked defense this week, but Jalen Hurts flies under the radar somehow for a guy who was the MVP of the Super Bowl. Do we see a more polished and mature Jalen Hurts?
I think so, and I don't read anything into OTAs, but what I've seen from him, and take this as you will, he's making quick decisions. He's not holding on to the football. And that might sound simple enough in 7-on-7s and even 11-on-11s, but he was holding on to the football in previous years. He knows exactly where to go. He's processing things quickly. You didn't see the vertical passing game or anything like that, but you have to bear in mind that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith were not doing team drills. Devontae wasn't there. A.J. didn't participate in it. So he's working with the Anais Smiths of the world, the Terrace Marshalls, and players like that. So I thought that he made quick decisions. There's a lot of horizontal passing game, and really that's all you can really glean from it. But I think that there's an understanding there with Jalen Hurts that now there's the expectations are even elevated more, and there's more eyes on him now, if you can imagine that. And he doesn't take that lightly. He knows that he is stepping into an even greater leadership role, and with that comes elevated expectations. He'll be ready for it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see him kind of like make that next evolution. I was looking about this the other day, Andrew, is you forget he's only 26 years old. It's not like he's, going into his age 30 season and he's been around. This guy has been around and he's only 26. So I would imagine there's probably more to the ceiling for him to get to, right?
I think so. And one thing that I don't think we even talk about nearly enough as a collective is his poise and how battle-tested he is. There's nothing that can be thrown at him that he's not going to be ready for. And he just has an inherent understanding of what's expected. He constantly sets the bar even higher. And, he's going to go out there and work on certain areas of his game that he feels was incomplete last season. There's another level that he could reach. And, nobody's more of a competitor than Jalen Hurts, and he's going to make sure that he goes out there and gets it done.
All right, final one for Andrew. You look at Barkley. I know he made the comments about retiring, all that stuff, but I would imagine that the Eagles have to scale him back a little bit here, and not because he's maybe talking about retirement, but he had so many touches last year. We've all seen guys who have that amount of touches, and then the next year them kind of fall off the map a little bit. But I guess the question would be, do you look at this offense and what they did last year in that he had those touches out of necessity, or just because, hey, this is the kind of the way the season's going, let's just ride it out, or do they need him to touch the ball that much?
It's a great question, Mike, and I'm glad you asked it because I think it was out of necessity. The passing game did not look as it should. It was very compressed. It was discombobulated. When you have that kind of talent, there's really no excuse for it. But they ended up revamping their philosophical approach coming out of that bye week, and Saquon Barkley was just ripping off, 100, 120-yard games at a remarkable clip. So they opted not to deviate away from it. But when you constantly hear someone like A.J. Brown or Jalen Hurts or even Kevin Patullo, and they mention evolve, the offense needs to evolve. Well, it's certainly not in the running game. So when you hear the word evolve, to me, that signals that the passing game needs to take it to another level. And I believe that they will. And they shouldn't lean on Saquon Barkley as much this season. I don't think that if you look back on at history, he's had a lot of tread on the tires, and health hasn't been, his calling card. Last season, the Eagles got really lucky there, and they do a good job of preserving Saquon Barkley. But in order to do that, you need to mix in someone like a Will Shipley, who I think is going to be the offensive breakout player this season. And you need to lean on your passing game with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert, who I think is going to have a really big season as well.
All right, there you go. Andrew DiCecco on the Eagles, who, by the way, have just added a running back. Free agent running back Killian Robinson from the Jacksonville Jaguars, former fifth-rounder. The Eagles have claimed him, so obviously they want to add a little bit more to that running back room as we're talking about running back there. They feel like they need a little bit more depth in that running back room, so we'll see one more day of OTAs, and then, of course, a little silence. We'll get into our division previews with Andrew, and then the start of training camp. And Andrew DiCecco is all over it for Inside the Birds and InsideTheBirds.com. All right, man, have a great weekend.
Mike, you too, man. Talk soon.